wanted to make more of a proper explanation as to why you should not support Israel or Palestine. Because just like it is with all wars, the people at the bottom are the ones who suffer, and then the people at the top don't actually do anything, and they just tell everybody else to go fight and draw up these crap narratives to get people to go fight, because people don't educate themselves to learn that they're being used. So first of all, if you're saying free Palestine, you might want to reevaluate that. And if you're in support of Israel because it's God's holy land or something, you also might want to reevaluate that as well. Number one, there's like a mass Christian like narrative of like, oh, we gotta side with Israel. No, we don't, because first of all, I don't know if anybody's ever watched like Ben Shapiro, for instance. Like the guy literally said on Joe Rogan's podcast, Jesus deserved to die on the cross. That he was a heretic. That he died a heretic's death, according to the Torah laws, which is Jewish law, which is in the Old Testament of the Bible. And because in case you didn't know, Christianity comes from Judaism. It's a continuation, kind of, maybe. We're still debating that in the religious studies category, if it's a continuation or a different religion. But I think it's a continuation of a religion. But in like ancient times, in Islam is kind of like the Palestinian people, and Muhammad that's like a continuation of Christianity, but in a different direction, because essentially just kind of a broad overview of it. Islam is like this isn't all denominations, but in most denominations, I think it's a pretty common belief that Jesus was God, died on the cross for, as one verse in John says, salvation is for the Jews, so that he died for the Jews. But after that verse, it also goes on to say, but for you worship in faith, because it was Luke. Luke is the one who wrote the book of Luke, is the one who wrote the narrative that this religion was open to the Gentiles. And so Muhammad did not believe that, obviously. And then so he wrote how outsiders can come in. So, or how you are to approach God. And so like in ancient times, like Palestine, in the ancient times, the region of Israel and Palestine had many cultures and religions that evolved over the years. Ancient people like the Canaanites inhabited the Israeli area, and the Canaanites were persecutors of the Jews, and the Jews were persecutors of the Canaanites. These people did not like each other, and they fought over the land known as today as Israel. And there was many other cultures, like you had the Persians, you had Babylon, you had the Persians, Babylon. The Babylonians oppressed the Jews and took them as slaves, and then the Persians came in and destroyed the Babylonian Empire and then freed the Israelites. And then the Israelites ended up in Egypt and were oppressed and enslaved there. And then Moses led them out of Egypt back into Israel. So, you had these people, you had both sides and both parties oppressing each other, because then the Jews, you can read the book of Joshua. The Jews would go out tore down the walls of Jericho and took the city and like took slaves from the city, and they literally have in the Old Testament where they have laws for how to treat slaves. So when they would go to war and they'd win the war, they'd take slaves. I mean, so both of these sides have used their religion and their religious beliefs to enact war and enact violence and oppress each other, and then weep and cry about it when they're the ones being oppressed, but then say it's okay when they go and oppress the others. But what happens is, so people don't read history, which is a very big problem, and here's why it's a problem. Because say I've never read a history book, and I see on the news people getting blown up. I'm seeing Palestinians getting blown up, and I'm like, oh, free Palestine. Yeah, there's nothing wrong with that. However, what's the problem that's going to happen, that keeps happening, is we go and free Palestine, and then Palestine starts oppressing the Jews. And then nobody cares because everybody's like, oh, well, the Jews are the bad people. Israel was the bad people. So, and the same thing happened with Germany in World War I. And they're like, oh, they're the bad people. And then that caused World War II because someone like Hitler comes along and they're like, we're not the bad people. They're the bad people. Why are we suffering for actions of other people? And then, then you go into a Second World War. Well, so you're going to free the Palestinians. They're going to go back to oppressing the Jews. No one's going to care. Then 100 years later, your great grandkids who've never seen the Palestinians getting their heads chopped off, and who also don't read history or look into history at all, they'll be like, oh, why are Israelites dying? Why are the Jews dying? We need to go free the Jews. We need to go free the Israelites. And then they go do that, and then guess what? The Israelites and the Jews, they start oppressing the Palestinians again. And then nobody cares because everybody's like, oh, well, the Palestinians are the bad people. And then the same thing happens. Then we get back to this point again where we're like, oh, the Palestinians are being oppressed. Free the Palestinians. And then you just keep doing this circular forever war that never ends because no one would just simply read a history book. And that's why you shouldn't listen to propaganda, because that's what it is. Propaganda. The news isn't given to you for free because they want you to be educated. Because if you're educated, then you won't fall for their marketing tactics and capitalism. But there's a guy, let me look up what his name is. Hold on. What is the guy? His name called Bassam Youssef. So this guy gives a crap narrative too. It goes on these shows with Piers Morgan, and I think he's a British news host or something. And he gets on there and he talks about the Jewish problem in the early 20th century, saying that they had a Jewish problem in Europe, and that it wasn't a Palestinian, and that they were wanting to send them to Africa in I don't remember what country they said, but yeah, that's true. That some European countries were saying, oh, well, we can give them land in these other parts of Africa, and that Palestine wasn't one of the options, but Palestine was the Balfour Declaration was in 1917, which was many years prior to World War II, or even the thought of World War II, where that's when they started saying, okay, hey, well, let's establish a state for the Jews because there's so many Jews coming into Europe, and because they're being persecuted, we need to establish them a state so that they can make their own state and, stop the persecutions of the Jews by, forming their own state that they can live in and live by their own laws and have their own country. So the British mandate, which kind of happened between the 1920s and 1948, which was the establishment of Israel, the tensions between the Jewish and Arab people started to rise because of this. However, this Bassam Youssef guy just starts it there. He's just like, oh, well, Europe had the Jewish problem. It wasn't our area. And that's a lie. The guy, straight up, told a half-truth and didn't fill in the past. Because why did Europe, because he even says it, he says, oh, Europe had the Jewish problem. Okay, well, how did Europe have a Jewish problem? Did they just wake up one day and say, oh, we really, just don't want Jewish people in Europe anymore, so we have a Jewish problem? No. They had a mass migration. Why did they have a mass migration? That's the part he doesn't want to tell you. He doesn't fill in that part. He just starts in 1907 saying, now they're saying they have a Jewish problem in Europe. Which was true. But the reason why they had the Jewish problem in Europe is because in the 19th century, so this is the 1800s, the area of Israel and Palestine was owned and controlled by the Ottoman Empire. And there was a significant religious and ethnic diversity in that region that included Muslims, Christian, and Jewish populations. But the Ottomans were not the nicest of people. And I want to say, when did they fall? I looked that up. Okay, yeah. So the Ottoman Empire, who was aligned with the Central Powers, let me see. Okay. So in the 19th century, the Ottoman Empire was the oppressors, and they, for those who don't know, the Ottoman Empire was one of the enemies of the United States during World War I. So that big First World War that we won, the Ottoman Empire were the bad guys. So they were oppressing people in the region, and they were slowly pushing the Jewish people out because they were trying to escape the oppression. And where did they go? They migrated into Europe in much more mass during World War I to get away. So you had oppression sending the Jews into Europe, which created the Jewish problem that Bassam Youssef claims for his narrative. And that led to all of these wars in the 20th century between Palestine and the Gaza Strip and Israel. And so these people that have a long history of hate and war against each other continued their conflict into the 19th and 20th centuries, where, and then not to mention, you had the Holocaust, where Hitler came along and said, oh, I've got a solution for the Jewish problem. I'm just going to kill them all. Which obviously is called genocide and not the greatest thing to be doing. And then everybody was like, oh, okay, well, we really now got to make Israel a state. So they said, sorry, Palestine, but we're putting the Jews back in that area and we're giving them a state so they can protect themselves. And that's what they did. And then everybody was like, oh, the Palestinian people were like, oh, well, they stole our, and now they're saying they stole their homes. Well, what about all the times you stole the Jewish homes? They didn't steal your homes. They got put back where their homes were. Like, that's like saying, that's like a robber coming with a gun to my head and right now telling me to get out of this house. And then I go to the gun store and buy a gun, come back, tell him to get out of my house. And then he says I ran him out of his house. And that doesn't make any sense. But that's what's going on. And that's what's going on both sides. And one thing that the Bassem Youssef guy is right about is that Israel does not want a two-state solution, but neither do the Palestinians, because they share Jerusalem. They share the temple at Jerusalem. They've been sharing that for, I mean, I don't know how long, but decades, centuries maybe. But they have a wall that divides the two sides of Jerusalem for their worship on that temple. And they fight over that to this day. And they've always fought over that. So each side wants the other one gone. And they draw up these narratives to make people feel sorry for them so that they can get the other side gone. And they both do it because they're both evil people. They both want the other side dead. Instead of just sharing this temple for their Abrahamic God and their Abrahamic religion that they both follow, but have different narratives on how you get to God, and they just won't share. And that's all. That's really all it is that both sides are evil and they won't share, and they try to manipulate you into giving them money and time and effort for their wars to oppress other people. So they're literally just trying to use the United States and other countries, both sides. But, I mean, we probably because, you know, supposedly terrorist organizations get money from the oil regions, and then obviously, you know, America's got to play in oil regions, so they're probably giving money to them, and then the government's publicly giving money to the Israelites. So both the missiles going to Israel and the missiles trying to defend Israel both probably are paid by the United States anyways. So it's all a big show just for the stock market. So that's the world we live in. So it is what it is, I guess. But that's why it's very important to know your history and don't just listen to somebody else and their narrative and then just start doing what they, you know, narrate for you to go do. So thank you for watching. Hope it helps.